about the other ones. That's amazing. All right. Rules Committee is going on across the street, and our author and several other committee members are involved in the Rules Committee. We've got two other propositions we want to take up today, and I see one of the authors here, and I'm looking for Mandy. I thought she was going to be here today. It's all right in the hall. Okay, she'll probably be in a minute then. Okay, all right, we'll wait on her then. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, she's
Huh?
presenting it for justice.
Oh, well, she did mention that to me, and I told her we'd give her a little leeway. We're going to be here a while, looks like. So, yeah, thank you for pointing that out, though, Chairman Martin. I appreciate that. Let's get started. We're going to have a word of prayer before we get started, and then we'll open this puppy up here. Lord, we do thank you for this day. Thank you for allowing us to come down and take care of the business for the citizens of the state of Georgia. We thank you for the life that you've given us this morning when we woke up. Lord, we thank you for the blessings you just pour out upon us every day. Lord, we ask you to help us to be good stewards of the business of the state of Georgia. We thank you for this opportunity. And Lord, I don't believe anybody in the room takes this lightly. But we just pray for your leadership, your direction, wisdom, and guidance as we go through making our decisions. Go with us now in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Ms. Beth Baskin, you have House Bill 297 before us. And I asked Beth to come up and speak slowly and take her time, as we've got a little time here. You can sit down there if you'd like, ma'am. You and your cohort. And you can introduce the people. Let me get you your microphone on. See if that's on, madam.
Can you hear me? Hello? I usually talk loud enough that it's not a problem, but I want to make sure you're hearing it through speakers and not just me blasting you.
That's her what?
Can you hear me?
Oh, that's how that one goes?
Maybe I should turn it to... No, we're turning it this way with the red light on. Can you hear me now? I think you can hear me.
But pull it up a little closer to you if you would. You may have to
Can you hear me now?
There you
yeah,
go. There you
go.
go. Eat that
Okay.
thing a little bit. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We don't want to rush this, but are you ready, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am. We are ready.
Thank you,
We
Mr.
have
Chairman.
House Bill 297 before us, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Beth Beskin. I have with me here today, in case they're needed for backup and moral support, from the Secretary of State's office, Ms. Candace Broach and Ms. Leanne Livingston. So I thank them for their input, but we're here with proposed House Bill 297, which is related to professional licensing boards. Professions and businesses are regulated within the state of Georgia under Title 43, Chapter 1 of the Official Code of Georgia. There is set up a scheme where there is a licensing board and there is the division director. And the powers of the division director are set forth at OCGA 43-1-2. And my proposed bill would make a change to paragraph J, subparagraph J, regarding how the applications for licenses are processed. And remember, this is the processing of professional licenses for only the professions governed by this board, not the other professions that have their own separate boards. But there's a long list of boards that come under this this statute, and specifically one that, for example, the architects. The change I'm recommending here was requested by the architects, but it would apply to all of the other boards, and it's a discretionary provision, and it streamlines their process. It simply says that the division this paragraph empowers the division director to establish administrative standards. This allows, but doesn't require, the division director to say that a professional licensing board may contract with a national association of state boards or other related national association to receive applications for examinations and perform administrative services with respect to such applications. So it's simply allowing, within the discretion of the director and then within the discretion of the board, to delegate the functions of receiving or collecting the applications and performing administrative services. It allows for efficiencies. It allows the state board to delegate that to a national association of boards. It also has one more word inserted that all along the director has adopted rules, and this allows him to further adopt regulations. So that seems straightforward to me, but I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
I hate to do this to you, but I think your delegate mate has a question for you. I believe Mr. Martin over here, I'm not sure if he's part of your delegation or not, but Chairman Martin said he had a question for you, ma'am, and he wanted to be first.
Okay.
You yield for questions, Representative Baskin?
I do yield.
For those that are here, this is the first time you've been before the Chairman's Committee?
This particular chairman's committee, yes.
And your first bill before regulated industries? Just to set the
With
framework.
much trepidation, I answer that yes.
And it's your point before this committee to bring things that are straightforward and good for the citizens of Georgia, is it not?
That's the only type
And
of legislation I hope
you're
to
an
ever bring.
learned attorney, and I'm only a simple man from North Fulton County.
I thought you were an attorney also, but I could be wrong.
So I would like to ask the lady, because I see Chairman Maxwell as a signer on your legislation, and yet you described this as perpetuating a scheme, and I looked that up on the dictionary here, and that was an underhanded plot. And so I'd just like to ask you if you had meant to bring Chairman Maxwell in with an underhanded plot, Representative.
I have to put this into a more historical context, and I would apologize, but I have a daughter. I actually have two daughters, and my older daughter spent 2 years in college and graduate school in the UK, which we formerly called England. And over there, a scheme is not necessarily a bad thing, so I'm kind of used to hearing her talking about schemes, and I have to admit the first time I heard it, I had a negative connotation too, so I totally did not mean to create a negative connotation.
Ms. Chairman,
it's not a scheme.
Ms.
It's a
Chairman, I'm
perfectly
satisfied
rational
with that
regime.
answer if you are, sir.
I hope you are. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Representative Baskin.
I think it's a regulatory regime. Is that better?
We'll go with regime. I like that.
All right, we have two other questions. Terry, you have Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
Representative
I
Rogers.
yield.
Why are you yielding? I didn't even ask you if you were going to yield, Representative Baskin.
I'm kind of new at this.
Okay, let's start all over again. Will the lady yield?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I'd like to follow up on Chairman Martin's question, I guess. He may have been satisfied with the answer, but the last part of the answer I'm kind of uncertain about. Are you willing to tell this committee that your advisor from now on everything is your daughter?
Actually, I don't have a fast retort on that one, but she is in law school.
Well, I was just wondering if your daughter might be a primary challenge to you or something. If
I think
we're going to take the end of the question. Thank you, ma'am.
I think that's far enough of that question. If you don't mind, the chairman will cut that one off. Thank you. I have a son that's an attorney, and I don't want to drag him into all this either with these attorneys here.
Any further questions?
Representative Hawkins, do you have something of meaning to add to this?
Oh my gosh.
I've got some real questions. Can you tell me which professions this applies to?
I anticipated that great question, and
Okay.
I have brought my very able counsel here, and we have an alphabetical list, and it used to include the accountants, but they just decided to have their own board.
Okay.
So if you ask me a particular one, but
Low voltage?
did that at low voltage? Yes, low voltage contractors is
Okay.
a regulated profession.
Right. And so it would affect them.
It could affect them if their board decided they wanted to delegate it to a national board of low voltage contractors.
Well, you also on line 19 have and regulations,
Correct.
the division director.
The division director may establish regulations,
Right.
which are different than rules, apparently.
Right. So my next question is, if they wanted through regulations to require continuing ed CE courses, would that be allowable with this wording?
I would yield this question to Ms. Brose.
So I'm Candace Brose. I'm new to the Secretary of State's office. So if any of you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. If a board decided to delegate these administrative duties to a national association to kind of handle application paperwork and getting a packet together that they would then send to us if someone's applying to get a license, they they would not, that national association would not have rulemaking authority. They
Right.
would basically just handling administrative putting packets together for licensure.
Right. But on this line 19, isn't allowing the division director to adopt by rules and regulations? Aren't we talking about the division director under the Secretary of State's office for that board?
Oh, I'm sorry. Our division director just sort of, works with the board. That would still remain with the board authority.
Right.
Actually, I would say this from reading the language here. This contemplates rules and regulations that are adopted by the respective licensing boards. So it would have to be, in
Right.
your example, the low voltage contractors board that wanted to adopt a different standard. And I think that authority is still here within the state. I don't think this delegates any substantive authority to a national entity. That's still local. They are simply delegating the ministerial task of administering their license, just the
Right,
mechanics of licensing.
Right, okay.
I think, if you don't mind me interrupting,
Right.
the low voltage, I believe the discussion we had last year or year before on another piece of legislation was they don't require some of the continuing ed. Is that right?
Their board would like to do that, but they're having a little difficulty getting clarification whether they can do that by rule or will have to pass legislation. And as you know, I try not to pass legislation when we can do it by rule. If we're going to attack two pieces together to do it, and so we don't have a plethora of bills like we already have.
I would agree with that.
So my question to you is, again, is there any way that this would affect them and give them the ability to require CEs through their board? When I see regulations on 19, I understand what the premise of this bill is,
Right.
but you're giving regulation authority to the division director, correct?
I don't think so. I
You don't
think
think
this is
so?
giving regulation authority in addition to the rule authority of the professional licensing board. And so this particular section is only related to the processing of licenses. But the
Okay.
whole regulation of professions is set forth in 43 Chapter 1, and there's 30 plus chapters within the title, and one of those others may specifically address your concern that the low voltage contractors want to be able to change their criteria for licensure for their members.
If I find out later that we can't amend this bill going to the floor to help those folks, would you be amenable to that?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
All right, let me go back to Representative Martin, or Chairman Martin. I believe he's got something substantive this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and
I
I
hope
do
so.
would respectfully point out that, Chairman, he asked us to slow things down a little bit.
And
to
I
wait for
appreciate
the other
that. Yeah, while
authors
we
to
wait
get
the
here,
other authors to be
or I
here.
wouldn't have taken the committee's valuable time, although I did enjoy the questioning from the representative. Is it not true, Representative, on line 19, the and regulations is a bit added to just standardize this, because in many of the places around our code section, it refers to rules and regulations, and that may be you're an attorney in all seriousness, and
Right.
not my. But is it not true that that's just to standardize as we codify similar language in other portions of the code, like in the tax code, we all the time say, and the department shall propagate rules and regulations. So that's not substantive change in whether or not they would outsource, if you will, to a national board. Those are separate issues, but if you will, cleanup language. Is that not true?
I would agree with that. That sounds like a reasonable proposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number 23.
That's me.
Okay, Representative Baugh.
Representative, as in other issues, when we changed the rules going, and they wanted to have their specific board do the registration, I think Representative Lee is one of the ones, the dental people, didn't they make their own boards for certification?
We just moved the board
From, okay. But in all these instances at this point, there's been no fee charges that was added to it. The different people who were involved in the new boards either increased their fees to cover their costs and all, and I didn't see one in here.
Actually, thank you for that. The provision whereby the boards collect fees for the services that they provide is set forth in 43.1, and I did print it out. I'm not sure I can find it here, but that did occur to me that they have always been authorized to charge a fee for the work that they do in processing licenses. And if
Right.
they're making it easier and more streamlined, it would make sense to me they would eventually lower that fee. But that's not addressed here.
But if you contract out this service, who's paying for that contracted service?
This doesn't provide for changing the payment regime for how one pays for their licenses.
So they can be no more than what the current license fee is.
No, but this doesn't address that. But I would say that if, for example, the architects start using a streamlined process to process their applications, the smart architects would eventually say, hey, why are you charging me $500 for that? Maybe it should be only $300 if it takes less of your time, fewer employees.
Well, someone's paying for that contracted fee to get the license.
Yeah, I think what
Right.
she's saying is the fees that they're paying now is assumed to cover this outsourcing. They're not raising the fees on any
But
of these.
if it costs more to contract it, who's paying for that?
Well, I would think the whole premise of this is it's going to be more efficient, so it would be less expensive.
Yeah, I don't think they would go out.
That's the discretion of the board.
Yeah.
If they do need to raise it, they can do that with 30-day notice, public notice, and the board can vote it. Boards have that ability to do that.
Thank you.
All right, one more question, Representative. Number 28. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative.
Chairman. Thank you, Representative. My question is really just for some clarification for me. You excuse me, I just read this over a couple times, but do you have an idea how many boards that y'all anticipate taking advantage of this if it were to pass?
I'm going to yield that to Ms. Broach and Ms. Livingston.
We've had a few boards, I don't know if you can hear me. We've had a few boards already express interest in doing this, so I think already we know from the architects they'd like to do it, and engineers in the next year or so would start considering that. But I mean, if other states are using a national organization or association to do this kind of processing, the idea behind this bill too is to make it easier for, if you want to transfer your packet to other states, that you'd be able to do that and get licensed faster in other places. So I think eventually all of our boards would consider at some point using a national association.
Okay, and one further, if I could,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman. With regard to specifically Georgia citizens or licensee that obviously resides here in Georgia, if they have an issue, problem, complaint, it appears it could be a little problematic to have to appeal to a national board instead of a Georgia licensing board, if you will. What would be the answer to that?
This would just be, they could bring everything, it would remain here with us, with our division director that oversees all of our licensing boards, and then the different directors we have per board. We have, an in-state mechanism to deal with any issues they may have, and they would not have to appeal to this national association as far as I know. We would keep it here in Georgia and handle all of that for them here.
Okay, they would just have to go by the rules and regulations that are set by the national. Well, I mean, once they adopted that, though, correct?
That the board be working in conjunction with the National Association. The National Association, if we delegate, what they're going to be handling are transcripts, the application, get that packet together, and they're going to send it to our board. It's just streamlining. They're not going to be involved in rulemaking here. It's just getting the packets together, making it easier.
Thank you.
Representative Braddock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm a little concerned with, some of our boards seem to operate better than others, and so, having them set regulations is a little of concern. If they don't operate well and they're taking months to, get people their license and people aren't able to get to work, I know under the current structure there's not a lot we can do. They have a lot of autonomy already. So how does this help rein that problem in, or would problematic boards be able to do this as well?
I think this helps rein in that problem by giving the local boards the ability to process through a national board. And if they have enough disgruntled, dissatisfied members, the members can say, hey, why is it taking a year to process my license? I need to get to work. And to put pressure at the local level to force that board to use a national board to process their licenses. I think it gives them an additional tool. They don't have to accept it. And they don't have to accept it currently. Currently, they're administering their own licenses.
And I'd like to say I've had several constituents have an issue with the licensing, and it's usually something they failed to fill out originally that was required by y'all, and then it got down to the last minute. But I've had nothing but excellent service out of everybody I've talked to in the Secretary of State's office. When it got down to the rubber meeting the road and something needed to be done, I'd make a phone call, they'd get in touch with my constituent, and it would be taken care of. You guys have just done an excellent job in dealing with all the folks, not many, but over the last few years, with the new license procedures, the backgrounds, and all that kind of stuff. Y'all have done an excellent job in working with the people that's come to me. Chairman Taylor, I believe you've got a comment to make here.
Yeah, so just to clarify, these local boards still have the control, but they're just outsourcing mainly the administrative functions to the national boards.
Exactly.
And for the second thing to clarify for Representative Cook, I think if the people are transferring or working in different states and need to have professional licensures, having a national board up there will allow you to get reciprocity a lot more quickly or in a lot more streamlined fashion. Is that correct?
I would agree with that, except for I'm not sure about your word reciprocity, because I'm not sure how each of these professions work in
different states.
But I mean, it would streamline the movement of a professional person in a regulated profession from one state to another if they already have all of your transcripts and that type of thing.
But I would think a national organization, say it only had 20 states, would still probably take a big chunk of that. You know, you'd probably see some commonality between the way they operated.
Exactly.
Thank
I think it's going to get more people to work faster.
All right, that's all the questions I see. Any other comments, you ladies? All right, appropriate time is here. All right, we got to move, do pass. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. All right, we got a motion, bill do pass, and we had a second. All right. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor, let them be saying aye. Any opposed, like sign. All right, madam, thank you for giving us your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and every member of the committee.
Thank you, ladies from Secretary of State's office, for being here. Thank y'all very much. All right, has anybody seen? Okay. All right, we have Miss Mandy is still in juvenile justice. We got a text up here. I think she's going to be late. Chairman Powell, how are you feeling? Well, that's a start. Okay. Yeah, we can probably arrange something to happen here. Day is still young. Chairman Powell, we're going to ask you to all right, for the committee, we're planning on having a hearing on 224 today. We've got, I don't know, a dozen or so, 10 people or so signed up to speak. And I'd ask you if you're coming up saying the same thing as somebody that's previously spoken, limit your remarks, but we're going to limit it to about 3 minutes or so on most of these anyway, because we got quite a few people. So, hey, thank you. We've got a lot of stuff here. Chairman Powell, and you moved on them. All right, we'll let everybody get all the paperwork. Oh, I got 2 of these. Did you get one of those? Yeah, you did. Okay. All right, Chairman Powell, we appreciate you being here. Hope you had a good Rules Committee meeting. And we'll ask you to present House Bill 224.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow committee members of regulated industries. I bring to you today House Bill 224, and even though I understand this is for discussion purposes today, unless the will of the chair changes, this is going to be a little bit lengthy, and I would ask that y'all bear with me because I think in this bill it's going to take a little bit of background that I need to give the members of the committee. Last year, the genesis of this bill started in the House Public Safety Committee, because last year it started out as an issue based on public safety, and it has evolved into even more than that at this point. Last year, when I introduced the first bill, it was based on, when I say public safety, something that had been brought to me the year prior to that from the Commissioner of Public Safety. Had told me about this new ride-sharing network. It was called Uber at the time. And, I didn't know what Uber was, didn't know what Lyft was at the time, and unfortunately I know too much about it today that I'd never thought I'd know. But at that time, the public policies of this state have always been that someone who offers their services as a for-hire driver, a livery service, the state of Georgia had always required a background check. And I'm going to interject that to tell you that taxis and limos are two distinct business models. Always have been. Limousines, back in the early 90s, we did certain things in the old industry committee that we regulated them under the Public Service Commission to the standpoint that it created a background check for limousine drivers. And that was done initially through DPS and Public Service Commission, and that's how we came up and how on the statutes today you have a what's called a chauffeur's attachment that's attached to a driver's license. And I want to put that in mind because it gets a little bit complicated from there to understand all the intricacies of this issue. Those limousine drivers, they go to the Department of Public Safety and they sign an affidavit and they put an application, and the Department of Public Safety does a background check based on the GCIC criminal background history. And that's to ensure that those people who are driving a limousine, that those people are not a convicted felon of a certain stripe. And that stripe meaning such as violent offenders or sex molesters or sexual predators or pedophiles and those type of folks. And the state of Georgia, our policy has always been the interest that those people who are driving you, because of the sheer nature, one, that you don't know who the people are, and because they have access to your basically your life and your safety in their hands, was that we thought it was always a public safety issue. Taxis, on the other hand, have always been regulated by the local governments, city and county governments. They set the rules and regulations. And the best I can tell, most of these city governments always saw that as a public safety issue, and they required taxi drivers to have that same type of a background check. Now, the benchmark to that has always been a GCIC. That's the Georgia Criminal Investigative Network that does that background. The benchmark is, have you ever been arrested for a felony or whatever the infraction may be, and what's the remediation? So that's always the benchmark, and that was what we had set last year in the original bill. Last year, the only thing that we started out asking for was that with the invent of this new smartphone, internet-based, app-based service that's been quite the phenomena in its popularity as far as ride-sharing and the black car model, the limousine model, was that with this new invent, it has become so vastly popular that people just are, they're mesmerized with it. So then it became an issue that we were dealing with the public safety. In the hearings last year, in your House Committee on Public Safety had approximately 12, 15 hours of public hearings based on this whole issue. Well, at that time last year, we realized because of the phenomena that this new ride-sharing network was not in the codes, nobody had ever envisioned such a thing, we realized that there were other problems. The other problems were insurance, liability insurance. Well, most of the ride-sharing, or what's called the X model in Uber and the Lyft, it's called ride-sharing. Well, at this time last year, the testimony that came out was that these folks who were driving, they were part-time drivers, they were hobby drivers or whatever, that these folks were driving their personal vehicles, of course, but they were driving with their just their general property and casualty and liability insurance. And the liability is the only thing that we had a concern with, because we realized at that point when the insurance industry got involved that there was another problem, that not only were these folks driving without a background check, as had been the public policy of the state, that they're also driving without proper insurance, because taxis and limos were always required by law to have specific insurance, and that would have been commercial insurance. And most of these folks that were driving for the rideshare networks, they were driving with their personal insurance. And it became obvious from the testimony from the insurance industry, and what they had injected was that there were major problems, because if there were ever any wrecks and accidents that were held, that the insurance carriers had said that they would deny coverage. So in fact, those people were driving uninsured if it had ever been an accident. Now, whether there was ever any accidents, I really don't know, whether there were any major accidents and all, but it was still an issue. So then the issue became, one was a public safety issue of a background check for the drivers. Then it became an issue of the insurance. And then for another degree, it became an issue for the tax issues, because under Georgia law, we're one of 7 states that requires sales tax to be paid on those services. So you have limousine and taxi cab companies that are paying sales taxes, but yet you had another new industry that had come forward that had not paid any taxes, to the best of our knowledge. And I can only say that after testimony last year from the companies. They don't know, in their opinion, they didn't know or don't believe that they owe, because they are a new industry and the such. But court decisions that had been shown to the committee last year showed that, in fact, prior to the day of a cell phone or a smartphone or an app technology, that the courts had ruled that transportation referral companies and transportation networks that offer delivery services, that they are, in fact, obligated to pay their fair share, just like any other tax-paying business in the state. So then we had 3 different issues. Well, last year, quite frankly, the bill, as a lot of the members here that were here last year knows, that this whole issue got tied up into the quagmire of public opinion, because we're not dealing with the normal issue. In my 25 years of being a legislator, I have never seen such an issue in my life, that you have corporate entities that have control of people's personal information. That's the members who sign up for their apps. They have their email addresses, they have their cell phone numbers, they have their credit card numbers, and all those pertinent facts. So it became quite easy for them to mount an aggressive offensive against anything that they didn't deem that they wanted to happen, or regulatory powers, or anything such as a background check. And they did a very handy job of that last year. One of the companies, one of the ride-sharing companies, put out, signage up and down Peachtree, and I thought it was a pretty handsome profile of me. It was basically on a style of a political campaign to vote no against this. Social networking, use of the social networks to basically put out the information of don't put our business out of business, which was never the intention then, nor it is today. But that being said, there was an awful lot of misinformation that was put out, and it was basically that you have companies that these corporate companies that are providing a service, a newfound service that is so immensely popular that it has created a blind spot in a lot of people's minds when it comes to working. I don't know how many of you got a email in the last couple of days, but one of the companies has been very handy that they, because they have all of their clientele's emails, sent out a email that said, call this one, call Alan Powell, call these members, because House Bill 224 is trying to put them out of business. That's not correct, ladies and gentlemen of this committee. This is a process and not an event, and I continue to try to remind people that. We have an obligation when we took an oath of office that we're up here to do what is in the best interest of the public. As the chairman of public safety, I take that very seriously. That was the reason I got involved into this issue, basically to see that those people under public policy, that those people had a proper government, state of Georgia vetted background check to be sure that those people were not of a certain criminal stripe that are out driving. Now, they'll maintain, or they have maintained, that they do their own third-party background checks. But I still, at the end of the day, it is my concern that the state has an obligation to vet those people to be sure that it's done right. Not that I would say that any corporate company would not be forthright in the information that, according to the guidelines of the state. But that's not really how it happens. You know, you can trust, but it's still a point of verification. That brings us up to the end of the session. At the end of the session, because of the acrimony between the parties, the limousine carriers, the taxi carriers, the new ride-sharing folks, it became quite an issue that there was a study committee that was legislated and put into effect. Speaker Ralston assigned myself and 4 other members of the House. Former Representative and now current Revenue Commissioner Lynn Riley was a member. Representative Emory Donahue was a member. Representative Dale Rutledge on this distinguished panel was a member. And, oh gosh, I'm missing one more. John Carson was a member. And, you know, we went through the testimony of those days on that study committee. And a lot other different take was developed. I went into it with the public safety standpoint in mind. But what came out of it, because of 4 other minds, they saw some other things. They saw the pitting of parts of an industry against each other. You know, the prejudicial view that a lot of people had that this was about taxi and limo companies trying to put Uber or Lyft out of business. I think what came out of it to those 4 other members of the committee was that wasn't exactly true. They were fighting for survival. The survival was because Uber and Lyft were not playing by any set of legislative or law rules, but taxis and limos were. One wasn't paying sales taxes, which automatically meant that the limousine and the taxi industry, they were already at an 8% disadvantage on the fare structure. They weren't having to have or didn't have commercial-based insurance, which was another huge issue. So it really became an issue of parts of an industry, and that's the ride or the transportation livery industry. It was pitting one group against the other. So that brings us up to the recommendations. And I thought it was interesting that while my position had been from the start of this, and that was the public safety standpoint, because again, I will tell you that every citizen has a reasonable right to expect that the person that they don't know who picks them up, whether it be a taxi driver or a limo driver or an app-based driver, that the public has a reasonable right to know that the person who picks them up, who has control of their credit card, that they're not a certain felon, of a convicted felon of a certain stripe. Someone that may take advantage of them or take advantage of their financial information. And that's historical knowledge. So in the process of the recommendations, that committee, those other 4 members of the committee, actually, those newer opinions took a whole different stand on the issue. Mine was only public safety based. But theirs became an issue that the number 1 priority should be parity. It should be level the playing field. And I don't know a soul that was on that committee that's not more about doing away with government rule and regulation where possible, basically deregulation, let the free enterprise work. And the bill before you is based on their recommendations. One was an attempt to try to work a better way of assuring that proper taxes are paid. The recommendation in the committee was that we forwarded it to the House Insurance Committee, which they're holding the bills now of trying to work through the details of ensuring that these new type industries, that they're properly insured with liability for the consumer. But this bill is basically about deregulation. I will tell you today that this bill is not complete, because as late as an hour and a half ago, I was still working with the people of the industry, the taxi and the limo and the ride-sharing folks. And quite frankly, there's parts of this that have just become a situation that we are having to agree to disagree. Most of that centers on the background checks, the number one part that I've had a concern about from day one of this whole process. They maintain that they have third-party, they pay third-party testers. They say that their testers go from courthouse to courthouse, which really surprises me, even though I suspect a lot of it is internet-based background checks. But they say that their backgrounds are sufficient. It meets their bar. If you look on the news, and a lot of the testimony and things that have been shown in the news shows that, well, there are plenty of folks who slip through that are convicted felons. If you saw a Dateline or a 60-minute investigative report back a month or so back. At the end of the day, this is where it comes down to. We devised a method in the bill, and it's certainly flexible. You know, we had changed in this bill, there's one of the sections, and it sets up a process that the Department of Driver Services, we changed the name from a chauffeur's attachment to a for-hire driver attachment to the driver's license. That way the background could be done with the GCIC based, and then they'd be issued that attachment. They could drive for whatever company they wanted to, because there's a verification that that person is not a felon, convicted felon of that certain stripe. We've even, as far as as late as an hour and a half ago, even reached out to these ride-sharing companies again about the possibility that if we could work out the language, that we would accept their third-party background, as long as they signed a sworn affidavit under penalty of perjury and submitted an electronic copy to the department, that it could be expedited and the issuance of that permit made. But the answer then was the same answer that's been on every nook and turn, that we don't want the government to do anything that's going to hinder our drivers to have to submit to anything. And I maintain, ladies and gentlemen, that, you know, I think it needs to go further than that. We have a duty, as our first duty as elected representatives, is to try to do those things, even if a minimum, to ensure the public safety. I'll be glad to go through the bill briefly. You've got passed out handouts on the analysis of the bill. Section 1 is basically deregulation. The number one city in the state that has a regulatory authority, and that's the city of Atlanta. They basically have said, more power to you if you deregulate. That's a deregulation chapter. Basically, it goes back to just general statute would deal with all of the transportation networks. The only thing that could not be dealt with was Atlanta is unique in the state of Georgia. They have what's called the medallion system. It's basically where they issue a number and a certificate of need for every particular taxi in the city. Because by law we cannot legislate a thing of value away, we're going to have to leave the medallion system in place where it exists right now. And as you look, as of 7/1 of 14, if that was in place, then they can tend to the medallion system, but we are stopping the medallion system from spreading any other jurisdiction in the state, and this stays in effect until it eventually goes away. And that's basically what the first section does. Section 2 creates the for-hire driver endorsement that I spoke about at the Department of Public Safety, and it basically says that whether you're a taxi driver, a limo driver, or a for-hire or a ride-sharing driver, that you should have that some semblance of a background check and it be on record. Section 3, basically the definition section that defines limousine carriers.
Mr. Chairman, let me
devices.
make sure they've all, this is summarized on that one of these handouts we got right here. If y'all are looking for it, you can follow it in the bill or on this summary right here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure they knew who you were following.
Section 3 is actually the other big part of the deregulation. This is the preemption section. This basically says that that state law and state codes that they apply, and that the locals, that they don't have that authority any further. In this bill, you will see certain languages such as inspections. In the limousine industry, The Department of Public Safety Motor Carrier Division does the inspections on limousines. Now, quite frankly, this isn't a very good policy, but for whatever reason, it's always been there, that limousine carrier is always registered with the Department of Public Safety. One-time registration fee. And for the price of that registration fee, they basically fell under a certain level of registration. Be sure their drivers had the proper endorsement and background checks, that the vehicle was in sound working order and such good, safe condition. Even to the point that the Department of Public Safety, when they inherited that a few years ago from the Department of from the Public Service Commission, their officers to this day still inspect every year annually all of the limousines in the state. State's sort of going in the hole on that. I've always equated that to sort of like going to Caesar's Palace and paying for the grand buffet, and then go back every year and you get to eat there because you paid it one time. And it's been of a drain to the Department of Public Safety Motor Carrier Division. But still, it basically it'll eliminate that part, because on the vehicle inspection, we surmised, and what the study committee surmised was that under Georgia law, it's very, very clear that if you have a vehicle on the roadways of this state, that vehicle is supposed to be in good working order. And if it's not, then a police officer can stop it and basically have it taken off the road if it's not in a good working order. All part of the deregulation, but Section 3 basically preempts local governments from that at that point. You have in Sections 3, you have referral companies are defined. You have the responsibilities of ride-share networks. You have transportation service, referral services is defined. And basically all of these basically state that those companies themselves would register. At that point, just a simple registration with the Department of Public Safety. Pay your registration fees, be registered. And the only purpose for that, quite frankly, is for the law enforcement, quote, service to know who's doing business in the state of Georgia. That's what it's really all about, who's doing business and who your drivers are, so that in case that there's a criminal act perpetrated, that those people, it could be investigated and found. Section 3 also, price competition and the disclosure of price. For those taxi operators and those folks, since limousines aren't covered, nor are the ride shares, then whatever the price cap placed on the cities at that point, that those caps would stand the cap, but we have taken off the floor, which means that they're not mandated to charge a minimum. They can then compete, and that's what the free enterprise system is all about. Section 3, page line 298 to 304, it requires these transportation service providers to maintain a list of drivers, something that we don't consider to be too terribly egregious, so that the law enforcement people will know who the drivers are in the state. Section 3 was a point of contention with the committee and the ride-sharing companies. If you look at that, it says it allows waivers. When you sign your app, when you sign up for Uber or Lyft, and you sign and you give them your credit card, there's a bunch of legal stuff that you punch on your phone. One of those things is you sign over your rights. You put a limitation on your rights to recover if there's an accident or whatever. Now, there's been a lot of discussion, and what we came up with as that study committee was that if you're going to sign your rights away, then that company needs to clearly disclose to you so that you know. I don't think there's probably many people out there that don't get on the internet and click a box or sign a box. And a lot of them don't know exactly that they've signed what they're signing away. But we felt, that committee's felt strong enough to say, if you're going to sign your rights away to a company on an internet-based app, telephone app, then they should have a right to tell you up front, read this information of what you're signing away. Another section dealt with the dereg, like in the city of Atlanta, that dealt with the horse-drawn carts. This basically says that the state ain't getting into horse-drawn carts. City of Atlanta Street Department wants to maintain that, since that's the end depository of their of that business, then let them do that through the street department. On Section 6, and that's certainly up for negotiation, what the committee had decided was, since one of the app-based companies, ride-sharing companies, the only thing that they would tell us was that they were negotiating with the Department of Revenue for past due sales taxes. The other company maintains that they don't owe it, and they ain't gonna pay. And what we had came up and what the committee said at that point was, there's got to be an easier way, since obviously there's untold amounts of revenue that aren't being paid in sales taxes. And this was an attempt to set up a method so that that every vehicle would be $300, and it was done by dividing the guesstimation from revenue and proceeds coming in by the number of estimated taxis, limousines, and ride shares of what that might be. And it was a method that came up that said they'd pay a $300 decal fee in lieu of paying sales taxes, something that would work proper. Now, when I tell you that is...
We're on page 3 of the handout, Chairman Martin. Page 3 is Section 7 is where he is now. Page 3.
I was actually trying to follow him along in the actual legislation.
Okay. It's line 440 through 445 on the bill.
Yeah, you said we're in Section 6?
It's text, he actually checked
Section-
Section 7 on this part here.
Section 4 is the decals. Section 6 is the sets of criteria for the for-hire endorsements.
I think he's in.
If you'll go back to the decals, the idea was tossed out there, and has since been basically rejected by the ride-sharing companies, because one says that they're in negotiations with the Department of Revenue on past taxes, and the other says that they're going to probably sue to say they don't owe us nothing. So, you know.
Get a little bit close to the mic.
And so there's, and that part of the decal is certainly up for change by the committee, or basically abolish it. In talking to the Rules and Means Chairman, his suggestion, quite frankly, was strike it. We made the offer. If they didn't want it, to make the offer. If not, we'll just put it back in and make a reference that under Georgia law, cite the code section, and basically let them take the chances of being audited by the Department of Revenue. And it's something that I don't relish, because we know that the corporate America, they'll hire the lawyers and they'll keep it tied up for years. And then if they lose, they lose. And if not, somebody will come back in later on, because it's all about parity. You have taxi companies, you have limousine companies that have to pay their sales taxes. They pay their corporate taxes. They pay all the taxes pertinent. But we have new out-of-state corporations doing business that aren't paying any revenue. That doesn't mean a whole lot to the folks who are so enamored with app-based technology and the thrill that they can go on their phone to get somebody to come pick it up. But still, there's a real world of governance involved here. And Section 6 sets criteria for the for-hire driver endorsement, basically based on criminal background and the GCIC, NCIC. And again, I will tell you again, and to remind the members of this committee again, that the number one failure of compromise was that the app or the app-based technology companies, they do their own background checks, and GCIC does not matter. Now, I still submit that at the end of the day, if you want to know the proper background on someone, you've got to go to the government site that shows how many times somebody's been arrested, how many times if they've been convicted of those crimes, or the crimes have been dismissed. And that's just the benchmark. And like I said, we've been certainly willing to work with them on other things, but you know, other things don't seem to work. And I would tell this committee as a parting shot, not that I'm trying to be ugly about it, but quite frankly, my biggest concern is this has been an issue about public safety. We live in a modern age. You know, I had nothing good to say about the ride sharing app-based companies. until I realized that their whole network and how they operate is all about being offensive in how they deal. Everything they want is all about them. It's not about the public safety. You look at and I'm sure most of y'all are like myself, y'all have gotten stuff that's been sent to you in the news media about the problems state by state. One of the companies has had a very aggressive nature. Their head of government services is the former campaign director of one of the presidential candidates, and they run their offensive strategy to stop states and local governments from doing anything that would apply to them. It's basically they know best, but at the end of the day, I still say there's got to be, when it comes to public safety, there's got to be a verification. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I'll be glad to answer any questions. There are probably other people who are probably as qualified that want to testify, that want to talk about this. I understand this is still a work in progress, and if there's nothing else that this committee can do except to bring these people to the table so that we can try to find a compromise, what we're trying to do is deregulate. Deregulate the industry. Let the fair market preserve. Let the best game plan work out. But let them all play on the same level playing field.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To stay there just a minute, we'll probably have some questions. I failed to introduce a very important person with us earlier this afternoon. We do have one of our former colleagues and now the Commissioner of the Department of Revenue, Ms. Lynn Riley, sitting over here, and there's probably others in the room that I didn't recognize. But Madam Commissioner, thank you for being here. Thank you for sitting in. And also, I understand she's got one of her Revenue Department experts, Ms. I think Amy One-Acre, that may be able to share a little information with us on taxes in a little bit. But thank you for being here, Madam, and I certainly apologize to you and your staff for not recognizing you early. You were a pleasure to work with when you were a representative. We enjoyed having you in our midst, and we're thankful you are where you are now. Look forward to working with you there. All right. Questions for Chairman Powell? I got one here. Representative, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Gotcha. Mr. Chairman, I want to go back to the issue of fingerprint verification and the background checks on the public safety side. Like yourself, I share that big concern. In our conversations, you've told me that basically the real sticking point on this has been the fingerprint requirement.
That does appear to be the number one.
I guess I'd like to know from their side, the operator side, what the issue is with that. I'm sure I can ask the companies later, but in your negotiations with them, what has that been?
They maintain that because they pay a third-party vendor to do background checks, they maintain that their background checks are sufficient. I maintain that while they may be sufficient, the state still has a role to verify. We might trust corporate America all we want to, but at the end of the day, our obligations and responsibilities are all supposed to be for the citizenry. And that's the role for us to verify.
Yeah, I guess the fingerprint requirement to me is sort of the deal breaker, because you and I can go out there, and a lot of people can go out there and get fake ID. I could have Chairman Maxwell's license with my picture on it. That's easily obtained, but the fingerprint is what the verification is. I mean, I can say I'm Howard Maxwell all day, but when Tom Taylor's fingerprint comes in, you get a stop in the system there. I guess I'm kind of perplexed as to why that is such a I'm public safety chair on MARTOC. Do you want bus operators, train operators, mechanics? Everybody that works there has fingerprint checks because it's a public safety issue. When I volunteered to coach youth soccer, fingerprint check. When I coached basketball at our church, fingerprint check. I can go on and on. Conditions of my employment. I work for a defense contractor. I'm required to have a security clearance. If I fail to submit my fingerprints, I don't have a job. And the requirements go to, as I understand, to the length of the license, the time frame of the license. So I think, saying it's onerous, to have that, I think once in 5 or 10 years is not an onerous process to do. And I really just don't understand that at all. I'll probably get into this with the folks from the companies, but I just wanted to express my thing there that is the key thing with me is the verification. I can fill out paperwork, and a background check can be run on Howard Maxwell that I'm impersonating, but when Tom Taylor's fingerprint comes back on that, you know you've got something wrong. And I don't want my children, anybody's children, being picked up by somebody who we don't know who they are. Now, things can always happen. You know, there are anomalies out there. There are people that are bad that just haven't been caught yet. But I think this, as a state, we have some responsibility there, because the first time something bad happens like that, they're going to come back and say, why wasn't this guy checked out?
Thank you, sir. I got a list of people. I'm trying to call you in order here. I believe number 29 was next. Representative Braddock. Are you there?
Yes, thank you,
Okay,
Mr.
there you
Chair. Okay, I have two questions. Well, first of all, I like they have a very innovative business model, and the business side of me, I don't want to impede their ability to do business. However, I would feel safer knowing that there is a background check in process. But one of the issues that I think, I don't want to prohibit people from being able to work either. Can it be modified to say, you know, only violent felons are prohibited from driving? Because I don't think a nonviolent felon should be prohibited from working.
I agree with you, but if we could ever get to that point, they'd establish the rules and regulations at DDS, and there's been extensive 2 years worth of talks with them about setting the parameters, basically for the operation of their investigators when they look at who's made an application for an attachment. Currently, they have a 10-year on the felonies, depending on what that crime is. Some crimes are considered a lifetime ban to be a for-hire driver or a limo driver at this point, such as crimes of egregious sexual nature, things like that. And, you know, there's been talk, and I have expressed this as someone who's been talking criminal justice reform for years. You know, we didn't just get tough on crime. We didn't get sensible with a lot of it. There's not a whole lot of crimes that aren't a felony now. My idea, and I've talked to them, and they've been very receptive, to set a 7-year limit on a felony. If your parole or probation officer, which knows the perpetration of your crime better, if that officer sees fit that you could be a for-hire driver, whether it be taxi, limo, or a for-hire, then let them make that decision. There's certain crimes, like I said, do you think a sex molester should be able to pick you up and you not know what their offense is? And yes, people do fall through the gaps. There's no perfect system of doing a background check. If you ask the GBI director, he'll tell you up front that we have people that are capable of getting through anything, that they can do false IDs. But, you know, the only thing you can do is hope that you have the best benchmark, and that is the criminal background check and what's on file with GCIC, and, quote, it goes through NCIC. So, you know, yes, and I will tell you up front, it was a little lengthy, but yes, that will be the rules and regs that deal with the attachments will be basically make it more applicable to folks.
So, and like I said, I like their innovative business model, and I don't want to do anything that would, you know, hurt their business, but I do agree that, you know, they should be paying the same sales tax that everyone else does. So my next question, is the sales tax that's being paid by the limo drivers, and is it currently being devoted to transportation? If not, could it be devoted, since we're trying to sell our souls to raise money for transportation and roads?
You know, all I can ask is please don't drag me into Briar Patch over House Bill 170.
Well, we're trying to do.
Currently, the sales tax is treated like all other sales tax. It is remitted on a voluntary basis, and it is remitted to the Department of Revenue, i.e. the state treasury, at which it goes to into the general operations of government.
Well, I would like to see that dedicated to roads, because they are using the roads, and, you know, that's tearing them down, and they should have that money devoted if they're going to pay the sales tax, in my opinion.
Taxi and limo companies, they pay an awful lot of registration fees and such. Quite honestly, that's one of the reasons for deregulating. Not just, I mean, as someone who has the belief that, you know, less government intrusion, but the minimum, then yeah, let's deregulate. Let's let everybody, is according to the study committee.
All right, we're going to another question.
Venues let them all serve with parity.
I'm going to go to number 15. We got several more up here, and then we got several people that need to speak before we get out of here. Chairman Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, you yield for a question or two
Certainly.
here? I wanted to ask about the fingerprint check. That was my first question, so if the chairman would give me two quick ones. Isn't it true that MARTA, as Representative Taylor said, MARTA drivers have those? That's a government-operated service, and the government decided the drivers that are going to be driving their service needed a fingerprint check.
If you say so.
Well, I mean, it's a government-operated service, right? It's a quasi-government authority.
If you say so,
Okay.
I have no idea about MARTA.
So I guess what I'm getting at, I'm concerned with us over-regulating the business and actually perpetuating a situation. I took an Uber 3 times this week in Fort Lauderdale between session Tuesday night and Wednesday morning. Didn't drive them all the way down there and back, by the way. I used the airline in the middle. But I didn't have I didn't have an expectation that anything other than I was making a personal contract with another party, just like if I were to hire somebody to come in and paint my house, may leave them in my house. I'm just trying to understand if I were driving down the road and gave somebody a lift and they paid me to do that, which we would have done years ago. People just drove around. That's how taxis started. Now we have a technology. I'm just trying to understand why we want to regulate them into a GCIC type fingerprint check when there's many other people that do things, close and personal to us all over the state of Georgia that aren't held to that standard. Some are.
Well,
doctors, maybe lawyers.
Before you get any more wordier, let
Sure.
me give you an answer. You took an oath of office to protect the public. You have an obligation. We all have that obligation. We're not over-regulating. We're just saying, give us a background. There's some things that this General Assembly has always voted on to require background checks. And I'll be glad to see if we can't pull your voting record. But, here's a list that's on your desk of all the professions that this General Assembly has required that they have a fingerprint check. You work at a daycare center, fingerprint. You work at a nursing home, fingerprint check. You're a real estate broker, a fingerprint, or an insurance agent, a fingerprint.
Isn't it true?
It has been the
I
public
take your point,
policies,
Mr. Chairman, but isn't it true when I would to take a relative in a nursing home, I don't meet every individual that's going to be in that nursing home all the times when I'm away from that? Isn't that true that I'm not going to be there to do that? I'm counting on that nursing home to take care of somebody that's under my care that I don't get an opportunity to see all 100 or 300 people that work there. Isn't it true that with this particular situation, I'm making an individual and personal contract with them? I choose to get in the car or not to get in the car, and I know eyes wide open going in what I'm getting. Isn't it a bit different than a nursing home?
No, sir, it is not.
Okay, we just have to agree to disagree on that.
At the end of the day, people have a reasonable right to expect that they will be safe.
All right, number 19. Representative Hawkins, you got a question?
I wanted to thank you for doing all this hard work. You and I got a little toe-to-toe last year over this, and because I'm an Uber user, I don't use them almost every night. I don't even believe in driving if I've had one glass of wine because I know what that could mean. But boiling all this down, it seems to me that you're heading in three directions. One, to make sure they have insurance to cover the liability of the passenger. Two, to verify that they're not a criminal themselves. And three, just to pay taxes like everybody else. Am I right about that?
I think you.
And everything else you've sort of
I think
thrown
you-
off the bill.
I
and
think
this,
you got the three salient points.
okay, thank you.
Basically, to deregulate so that all of the businesses can openly compete. Let the best model win.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Number 23. Chairman Gowick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, I appreciate the work that you've done on this, and I know that I think your intent is good. I mean, it's obvious in speaking to you both privately and publicly that I think you have the best interest of the public in mind. I just wanted to express a very brief concern that I have from just a philosophical standpoint. I understand that there may be isolated issues. Insurance is one, security may be another, taxes may be another, and those are mays that we may or may not address as the session goes on. I just want to get be clear, though, that what jumped out at me in the bill really started at line 103 and went down from there. But that first sentence that essentially describes and says that it's the expression that the General Assembly finds that it's in the best interest to have parity among all types of transportation users. And I know we talk about a level playing field in this building and across the street, a lot in terms of particular industries. But at the end of the day, I take a giant step back and look at the issue. My sense is that the prevailing feeling, and again, knowing that the gentleman's motivation is pure, my sense is that the prevailing feeling, though, is that government really ought not be in the business of mandating parity between private entities in business X. Here we're talking about transportation. It could be the manufacturer of widgets, whatever it may be. I don't see us having, and I think the prevailing feeling here is that we don't have a role in that issue. We may have a role in taxes, we may have a role in security, we may have a role in insurance. Those issues will work themselves out one way or the other. But as a general matter, do you agree that when it comes to taxis, limos, the rideshare transportation network companies, whatever they're called, that we really don't have, but the government really does not have a role in picking winners and losers there, and that we don't want to mandate a level playing field in that, and we want the market to go and dictate that. And I sense that's where the body is, and I just wanted to. I read that, and that jumped out to me more than anything. And knowing the gentleman I wanted, and knowing his general intent on these things, I just wanted to express that as a general concern,
Right.
and then be quiet.
I thank you for that comment, and let me assure you that, and while that parity, we're not speaking about parity in the business models. I quite frankly could care less what Uber or Checker Cab or Lyft, how they operate their business model. My only concern is that their drivers are secure drivers. They're not criminals of a certain persuasion. That they're paying their taxes and they have the proper insurance, because that's the public policy that we're here to do. So when you see the word parity, this comes out of that study committee report, that the parity that we're talking about is, let's deregulate. Let's let them play from the same way. If one crowd has got a better mousetrap than the other, then so be it. But let's don't mandate that one of them has to be at the mercy of a city and their obscure rules and regulations. If you're going to deregulate it across the board, and that's what we're asking in this bill. If one company, if they're required to do a background check as they should, let them all be the same one. If one company's got to have liability insurance, then let them all have insurance. If one's got to pay taxes, then let them all pay taxes. That's the equal playing field. And if one company runs it better than the other, so be it. That's going to be the winner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all the questions I see at this time. Would it be possible to ask Amy to come up, and would you mind, Ms. Onaker, come up and tell us a little bit what you can about the taxing issue? I would appreciate that if you want to step over here and just address the committee, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'd like to hear from you before we have testimony, since y'all are here and been waiting patiently. We'd like to give a little stance on where we stand tax-wise.
I'm happy to be here, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I don't have any prepared comments. Are there specific questions related to taxes that I can answer for you?
Well, are we looking at taxing these entities?
Well, I mean, taxes are already due on transportation services. So,
And
I mean, the
we
law
consider
already
them a
provides
trans-
that transportation services are subject to sales and use tax.
And
So
we
that would
can-
be limos, taxi cab drivers, rideshare companies, anybody who provides a transportation service. There's already a tax due.
Okay. So we are assuming that they should be playing under the same rules and regs of all the other livery services in the state.
That is correct.
Okay. Chairman Martin, do you have a question?
To follow up on that, and understanding that is it not true that specific conversations between you and a taxpayer you might not be able to share with this committee due to state and other law, rules of your department and state law? So if I ask you one of those and you can't answer it due to that, I don't want the committee to think she is dodging a committee question. But with that, let me ask you this. Has the department taken all the action it can or that makes sense toward gaining compliance from one or more companies that you would think at this point are not yet completely in compliance with our law that we're talking about here today? Are you able to answer that?
Well, I believe that the department does everything it can to ensure that everybody who owes the sales and use tax pays the sales and use tax. And so we will use every method that is available to us to try to achieve compliance from everybody, whether it be a taxi cab driver, a limo driver, a rideshare company, or anybody else.
So if an audit of these services were necessarily required, there may in fact be one ongoing.
That is possible, yes.
Okay, well, yeah, but I know you can't talk about that. I was just going to make sure that either there were negotiations. Wouldn't it be fair to say if you're aware of this, the department is taking steps with or without the legislation before us to get them compliant? Is that true?
It is true.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Miss Amy? Thank you for being here today, ma'am.
Yes, sir. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, just really quickly just highlight for the committee, and I know that the bill is only in discussion at this time, but then the new scheme, I'll use your word, scheme, because we had a good fun with that term earlier, that is being proposed in the bill provides for a sticker fee per vehicle at $300 per vehicle. And I believe a comment was made earlier that the department had provided data that would support that amount would equal what we're currently collecting in sales and use tax. And I just wanted to highlight for the committee that I don't believe that to be true. We don't have exact perfect numbers on the exact amount of sales tax collections from every transportation business, so we can't really provide a number. I would highly recommend that we leave that up to the physical research folks to try to determine how much that sticker fee would have to be equal to what our current collections are for sales and use tax.
You have another question, Chairman Martin?
Would this be fair? I mean, the stickers that were suggested were $300, correct?
That's right.
And just dividing 6% sales tax into $300. So if a car, particular vehicle, is doing more than $5,000 worth of business in Georgia a year, then the sticker would in fact be much cheaper than if they were doing 10, you would collect $600 in sales tax. Simple math, correct?
Exactly.
So
yes.
so I don't know that any car out there can be a full-time driver and probably make it for $5,000 in fare a year.
That's probably true.
Representative Hawkins, you have a question?
Are there any entities that pay tax on self-reporting in this state?
I'm sorry, I'm not
In
sure.
other words, the driver would at the end of the year say, "I made this much," and then submit the tax that way.
Well, sales tax is reported on a monthly basis.
Right.
So certainly, if they are providing taxable fares, then they
Right.
would owe sales tax by the 20th day of the following month.
Oh, okay. So they pay it monthly then.
Yes.
That seems more reasonable, Mr. Chairman. That a lot of the drivers I've had with Uber have been Georgia Tech students, and I hate to make them pay $300 to get into a driving situation to help them make some money. I mean, it's sort of a tough thing for them to jump over. Okay.
All right, we've got another question. Number 16, Chairman Powell.
Mr. Chairman. Amy, good to see you.
Mr. Chairman, always a pleasure.
I want to clarify how we came up with the figure. We did reach out to the revenue to get a figure on how much money had been collected in sales tax. And we did this on a guesstimation since we knew that neither Uber nor Lyft, the two principal players, had paid no sales tax. Now, you can't, I'm not asking you to verify because you can't disclose any investigation or any pertinent information. But then we decided we did those figures of what comes in and what was a guesstimation, and that was how the $300 figure came up. Now, let me ask you this question. Without disclosing any information about any investigation, under the current Georgia law, the sales and use tax law, these transportation referral companies, these rideshare companies, you have these companies that are based out of state. They're the ones, they collect the money. They're the depository of the credit cards. They're the ones who collect those monies and then disperse the money, the commission, back to the drivers. Are those people due? Are they the ones that are obligated under Georgia law to pay sales tax?
We believe that they are. The law provides that the tax is due on charges for transportation services. And so, in my personal opinion, I believe that the law strongly supports that whoever is making a charge for a transportation service, it is receiving the funds for the transportation service, that they would be subject to the sales tax under the law as it exists today.
Second question. As the director of the Sales and Use Tax Division, to the best of your knowledge, do we have limousine companies that pay sales tax?
I'm sure we do.
Do we have taxi companies that pay sales tax?
I'm sure we do.
Do we have any ride-sharing companies that pay sales taxes?
We might.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, one more question, then we're going to let her sit down if we can. We got a bunch of people we got to hear. We got 35 minutes, if my clock is right. We got to be out of this room, I believe. And I know I've got other meetings, and some of the other folks have too. All right, Mr. Chairman Martin, one more time.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this. This is an important issue. I mean, Chairman Powell brings issues with tax up, but it is important. And at the risk of turning the chairman's meeting into a Ways and Means meeting, isn't it a bit true that here we have a sort of a situation like we had with the hotel companies, Travelocity and Expedia, that, you know, to get to the answer of that ultimately took the wise souls at the Georgia Supreme Court because, you know, of what exactly the number was that you were charging on. And isn't it not true that the difference in the taxi cab companies that are assured that they should collect it, where there's a little bit of difference, they own the cars, they provide the service as well as the dispatch, where in the cases that we're talking about here, it's a company that's an intermediary. And again, I'm not making the case, I hear yours, but there is a difference when one applies the tax law. Is that fair to say one that we're breaking new ground here?
I think that is fair. I think it's very synonymous, though. I mean, I don't even know that I would step out and say that it's, you know, completely breaking new ground, because I think that the third-party hotel reseller scenario is very synonymous.
Similar scenario, right? I just meant breaking new ground versus the cab company.
Yes.
It's more over on the service provider, whether you're a service provider or an intermediary.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, madam. There's no more questions, and thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
And just saw Vernon Keenum, our head of our GBI, come in. Thank you for being with us today, sir. Thank you very much. All right, we've got a few testimonies we're going to hear. I'm going to call you by the way you signed up here. Ben Peacock, are you still with us, Ben? Yes, sir. Would you like to come up, just come around here and share your thoughts with us? Yes, sir. If you could, as quickly as possible. We've got about 12 people. Huh?
I'm going to skip every other word.
Well, okay, that'd be good. We could probably understand. We're legislators. We're used to that.
I want to thank you guys for putting this together, and ladies, and thank you for your service. Brief introduction. My name is Ben Peacock. I work for a company called Lighthouse Information Services. We've been in business over 15 years, and we perform over 1,500 background checks a day in the state of Georgia, including GCIC. We have 3 offices in the state. As you know, we've discussed the fingerprint, and I think we've all watched too much CSI because you have a huge misconception on what that program is. I'll give you some of their stats, not mine. Like I said, I'll try and be brief. I sent all of you some information this week. Thank you for Representative Rutledge for responding to me. Per the Attorney General's report on background checks, again, not my report, the Attorney General's report, the FBI, which is the NCIC report, readily admits that they are missing information for approximately 50% of its records. 50%. That's not a very good benchmark, I don't believe. Additionally, that report advises that if users want more complete and up-to-date information, they should use other sources, like conducting courthouse-level research. That's the source. That's where the records are. There are numerous concerns with NCIC, again, but I'll just throw out 2. On their most recent audit, they admit there are 2 million records on NCIC that are incomplete and inaccurate. That wasn't 2,000, that was 2 million. And they're already 50% inaccurate. 27 states have a backlog on getting data entered. Some of those are years behind on entering data. The Cato Institute article that I sent you from the National Employment Law Project, it says that FBI records and statewide repositories like GCIC are routinely flawed and rarely submit the follow-up information on the disposition, the final outcome, or the arrest. Now, these programs have benefits. The GCIC statewide report, it's a good supplement search for conducting a background check. But as we just saw in 2013, in the Georgia Senate hearings that hopefully you guys looked into on expungement records, those hearings, this is one of their statements. There are significant omissions and errors in the GCIC product when dealing with probation violations, revocations, and the resolution of a first offender program. The only way to ensure the most accurate, complete, and up-to-date information that provided in a background check is to conduct research at the county level, at the source. If the true motivation of this legislation is safety, and thank you for all the work you've put into it, it seems years, and I appreciate that. But even the legislation is already on the books that Representative Jurgensen wrote with daycares and nursing homes and all that. If the true goal is public safety, if the true goal is protecting communities and high-risk populations, only conducting a GCIC or only conducting an NCIC search, that is falling well short of the mark. This needs to be changed not only here with rideshare programs, but statewide in other industries as well. Again, these are not my stats. These are directly from the NCIC audit. And again, they are good programs. They do have benefits. There is no doubt. But anyone who says that it is the end-all, be-all, or the gold standard of conducting a background check, it's a fallacy. It's not true.
All right.
Thank you.
Questions? We're going to take just a couple of questions here. We've got number 11 was up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand what you're saying about that there are inherent difficulties or problems or lack of information through the fingerprint system, but doesn't that also exist if you don't use the fingerprint systems?
Well, there's not a problem.
If you check in the county here and he's had a problem in Kentucky,
yeah,
checking in the county doesn't show that.
No, and that would be the benefit of the GCIC or NCIC system. It should be a supplement. Can I briefly explain the best way to do a background check? You get some.
I think we all got your materials.
No. It doesn't have to do with the material, though.
But my question to you is, it seems to me what the big discussion is about whether or not we should have the fingerprint system as more than it is for it to be the sole thing.
I would argue get it right now and do a complete background check and not just one portion of it.
Okay. All right, two more. Number one, Ms. Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe Mr. Chairman covered my concern. Were you making the recommendation that it was a supplement? It should be a supplement, and then you raised the question of doing a local.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. 26.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Peacock, for coming down and sharing the information. One of the concerns that we've experienced or heard is when a background check is performed, how does the state of Georgia, how would we know that the Uber drivers or Lyft drivers or taxi cab drivers have actually gone through the process of having a background check? How would we know?
I don't know the answer to that question. Okay. And I think it's a very valid one.
Right.
But the concept, though, that the GCIC or NCIC is and I'll use the representative's term, benchmark for doing a background check, that's a fallacy.
Right. Let me follow up. In my business, I'm in the freight cargo business, and our drivers that tender freight on exports have to go through Homeland Security checks, and we have to ensure that we do background checks as part of that certification when drivers are delivering freight that are going on passenger aircraft. We have to, we don't file that with anyone, but we're saying, or even with Homeland Security, we have to have, if we're inspected,
we're audited. We have to have that information on file, and it has to meet that criteria. So, in my opinion, and I know that this is a big concern, and it'll be for the will of this committee to decide that. I just think that it's not necessary to require a fingerprint background check.
when the third-party background checks are working fine for many other industries. And I understand, the list here, but a person, my mother staying at Benton Village is a lot different than a passenger getting in a car and driving, a few minutes with someone. So I don't think that's comparing apples to apples, in my opinion. So I appreciate you sharing that information. And again, I want to thank Chairman Powell for dealing with this for the last year. It seems like a lot longer. And what happened yesterday with the emails going out to the representative, this is a process. And I just want everyone to know that a lot of folks spend a lot of time dealing with this, and I'm one of those folks. And the process is bringing the issues to light and trying to figure out a way. And like Representative Golick, I think government is charged with creating an environment for business to grow and thrive. And I think that's the intent of what we're trying to accomplish. I'm not an attorney, but I think we're trying to take a new business platform and put it in a code section that it doesn't fit. And that's my opinion. I think this is a tip of the iceberg. In the freight business, I can see Uber freight trucks. Folks looking at an app, looking where freight can be picked up, looking where the trucks are, and that freight moving. And I'd like to get with the Uber folks on that to help me figure that out.
Well, and I meant no disrespect. Just like just going to the county wouldn't be complete, neither is just an NCIC or a GCIC.
Right. Chairman Powell, thank you for your comments.
Yes, sir.
I think you verified what I was saying, that the only reason that we have signified GCIC, that's just a benchmark of what is somebody's officially been charged with. And I thank you for making a point about the importance of both types. Let me ask you this question.
Yes, sir.
Having been around and done these, there was a proposition that was put on the table. The state would be the licensing to basically, we set the criteria of what's acceptable to be a for-hire driver, regardless of the background, whether it be a GCIC or a for-hire company doing a background. If we do it that way, there's still got to be a connect somewhere between the licensing agents. So do you feel, with your experience, is there any problems that a company that uses a third-party background, that they would submit that information and with a statement that, to the best of their knowledge, this has been done by this company, and to the best of their knowledge, this is correct, for it to be on file for the verification purposes?
I don't understand. I don't know all their processes, but I'll say for me as a private investigator in this state who's licensed, not only did I have to do the fingerprint, we also were required to do full background checks at the county level, and I had to report that all with my application for my license, and it wasn't that difficult for me in that instance.
So it's just basically a paper trail.
It was a paper trail, yes, sir.
Something is verified, and that's the way it is.
And a normal background check can be done in 3 or 4 days if it's done well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peacock. Appreciate you being
Yes,
here.
sir. Thank you.
Look forward to hear from you again. Mr. William Pencil, and up next will be Nick Zamborowski, I believe. I'm probably murdering these names.
My name is William Pinnell. I'm here on behalf of the CP&C license holders. Thank you all for your time and attention. To operate a taxi cab in Atlanta, you need a CP&C license. Uber has been ignoring
What is that now, CP&C?
That's the medallion.
Okay, the medallion, okay.
And Uber's been ignoring that for the last 2.5 years. And the taxi cabs are feeling it. And like you said, Representative Powell, they're offensive. And Uber's offensive and disrespectful. They disrespect the laws in Georgia. And like you said, the CP&C licenses aren't going anywhere. So I just ask you, when y'all are looking at this bill, just make Uber accountable to CP&C license. If you're operating a 4-door car, you need to have a CP&C license. Before Uber came to town, they were auctioning off about $80,000 a piece. And now you'd be lucky to get about $25,000 for a CP&C license. Hundreds of Georgia residents own these licenses. They're losing property value. Legislators, lawmakers put the CP&C licenses into place years ago for a reason: public health, safety, and welfare. Just want y'all, keep all that in mind, and don't forget about the unfortunate CP&C license holders and taxi cab companies when y'all let Uber infiltrate the city and take over. So, yeah.
I'm going to hold questions right now. I got 2 questions out here, but would y'all that's got questions, maybe we got to get out of here shortly. We got 20 minutes left and about 7 more people to talk. So would you mind hanging around, William? And these people that have individual questions, if y'all don't mind, let them get with you afterwards, okay? Thank you, sir. Appreciate your testimony. Nick? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee. It's Zabriskie. You were pretty close, but it gets butchered all the time. I just wanted to thank everybody for the opportunity to come in and testify in front of all you folks today. Very, very encouraged by some of the things we've heard about this bill. As I think a lot of you know, we oppose it in its current form, but this is very, very good news that we're willing to keep examining this and working towards it because we feel we have a lot to offer to the residents of Georgia.
Now you were with Uber?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't even identify myself.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to ask you to identify you.
Yeah, apologies. Nick Zabriskie. I'm public policy at Uber Technologies.
Okay.
So thank you all. I'll try to keep my remarks real short. Just a couple things that I wanted to note. First and foremost, Uber did send out an email to a small subset really of riders that are in the general area, who to make them aware of HB 224 in its current form. However, we did not direct any of those folks to respond to some of all the way that they have. Certainly, there are some independent people that might have contacted you independently that perhaps included unsavory remarks. I just wanted to make it clear, though, that from our perspective, we're very willing to work with you all through this process. We very appreciate the opportunity to sit here and work with you on this, and certainly anything that was said probably is just a reflection of a lot of the frustration and deep, interest in preserving what all people have come accustomed to experiencing in the transportation. So. With that, though, I'll just share a quick overview. This might be repetitive to some of y'all, but just very quickly, Uber, we're a technology company. We provide a platform for individuals looking for rides and others willing to provide them so they can find each other and figure out where they want to go. We're helping hundreds of thousands of Georgians gain access to convenient transportation and creating economic opportunities for people who provide rides through our platform. And drivers have been providing rides through our technology here in Georgia since 2012. We operate as a frontline regulated industry, and I appreciate Chairman Powell's remarks before when he was talking about the history of the regulations of the limo and the taxi industries. The way our system works, would-be drivers go through essentially extensive screening before gaining access to our platform. We do background checks, there's proof of insurance, there's a training process, and then once on the platform, there are numerous features in our app that help provide the highest level of public safety. I think it's interesting and important to note that when you have these licenses for limos or for taxi, what you have is a licensing process because people are getting into vehicles with folks that are more or less complete strangers. What you have on our platform is slightly different. I think it was mentioned before, folks are essentially entering into a prearranged contract with somebody that they've been matched with. They have a picture of the person. They have the make, model, and license of their car. They know exactly what vehicle they're supposed to get into. They enter it. They take it to where they want to go. There are a number of safety features that are built into the application that make it much different from, say, just getting into a taxi off the street. We don't do street hails. There are a lot of factors that are inherent in our application that we use technology for that kind of solve a lot of the needs that solve for a lot of the issues that traditional regulations were designed to take into account and try to account for. Some of the other things, really quickly, I just think it's important to note. There's no cash exchange, so drivers aren't targets for robbery, for example. The matching is done through GPS, so they're willing to travel to any neighborhood. There's receipts, electronic record of each trip, anonymized phone numbers for the parties to contact each other to coordinate pickup or if something is left behind. And most importantly, there's feedback after every trip which is an unprecedented step in the transportation, the traditional transportation for hire industry. We have real-time responses from all of our rides that say whether it was a good trip, what their experience was like, whether there were any concerns about the driver or the vehicle, and this really helps us hone in on quality and make sure that there's safety and accountability across the platform. So I think it's just important to know that, because from our perspective, we think that there is a very big difference between somebody that's providing rides through our platform, where it's this contained system of people entering into private contracts, essentially, versus somebody that's out on the street that can pick somebody off the street, where there are more, there's a clear need to have some kind of state licensing regime for those drivers. From our perspective, it's much more closed. We view it's a truly self-regulating system. We use technology and economic incentives to address the kind of concerns that these traditional regulations were meant to account for. That is not to say by any means, though, that we are opposed to regulation. We're definitely here today. We want to work with you all to come up with an appropriate way to regulate this new kind of transportation service. One, though, that would preferably focus on the companies themselves and putting in place strict standards that the companies need to meet to ensure public safety, as opposed to focusing in on the driver, because, again, it's different from some stranger getting in the backseat of some stranger's car. There is prearranged connection there. It's also important to note, too, when we talk about all the transactions that take place on our platform, it's all done through credit card. But the drivers themselves never have access to that information. So there's no exposure for fraud or things along those natures, because somebody has some kind of issue on their record, although we certainly screen for those kinds of things. A few points. We conduct extensive background checks on every potential driver, and these checks involve courthouse checks, multi-state criminal database searches, National Sex Offender Registry cross-checks. We do a county, a multi-state, and national check. For us, one of the most important things that we can do, we're selling trust to our customers. It's inherently in our interest to make sure that our drivers are the safest possible drivers on the road. From our perspective, we need to be able to, what we're hoping to be able to do is to go and use the best processes available for us to get the best possible results. Now, that means not necessarily relying on one database to get all that kind of information. If there was some kind of option where, drivers had the ability, if they're so interested, to go and get a special license, they're totally entitled to do that. But you cannot be on our platform if you don't go through our own background checks. By which I mean to say that we think that we need to preserve choice in the marketplace, make sure that that folks can choose. Essentially, I mean, you could conceivably create an option whereby providers could choose to get a background check done by the state, or they could choose to use a third-party vendor. For our purposes, we have to make sure that we are using the most rigorous and most comprehensive check possible, which means we need to be able to check not only the Georgia database, but we need to check folks coming in from other states. We need to be able to look at all the places where somebody might have lived and be able to go to those courthouses directly and pull their records to make sure that nothing is slipping through the cracks, because we're going to be held to a high standard, and that's something that we do of our own volition because it's really important to us. On the insurance piece, we provide primary insurance coverage of $1 million, which is much higher than the minimum requirements on limo and taxi. So from the instant a driver accepts a ride on our platform until they exit the vehicle, we have $1 million in commercial insurance that we hold as a company. And we also provide coverage even when a driver just has the app on in their vehicle, just in case the driver's personal policy doesn't cover them during that period. I know that another committee is looking into this issue, but it's important for us to note. And then I think it's important to also note that our driver partners, they're different from professional drivers. Approximately 50% of our drivers are doing this less than 20 hours a week. 28% of them are doing it less than 12 hours a week. From our perspective, it makes more sense to regulate us as a company and put in requirements that we meet, so you're not going out and you're treating some driver as if he's a full-time chauffeur person, making get a special license, when our technology already does a lot of these things. So I think that as we talk about these things, we very much look forward to hopefully continuing this conversation and seeing what more we can do on this bill. Public safety matters are definitely in our interest. We appreciate the committee's the committee's responsibility to make sure that public safety is being met. We're just looking for a couple of suggested changes.
Turn myself back on here.
Mhm.
I got several questions, guys, but we've got about 6 more people. We got just anybody's got a real pressing question? Real quick. All right.
We couldn't ask the person from Revenue, but we can ask you.
Mhm.
Does Uber pay taxes?
Absolutely. So this is really important for us to note. We are a Georgia company. We have 17 employees here who are very high skilled jobs. They're based in Atlanta. We pay the state income tax. We also pay the Fulton County tax, City of Atlanta business tax. When it comes to drivers, we provide all drivers with a 1099. And then on the question of the sales tax, which we recognize is a difficult one for the entire industry, we've actually submitted a voluntary disclosure application, VDA, to the Georgia Department of Revenue. We did that back in 2014, and we're in ongoing conversations with those folks. But from our perspective, we very much want to get the regulations right, so we can operate in this state and continue to create new jobs here and new economic opportunities for drivers.
All right. Yeah, we definitely we appreciate the personal income tax and all that, but we're looking at the other tax issues, I believe, that y'all are discussing now. All right, real quickly.
That's okay.
Okay, you're good. All right, Chairman Powell, one quick question.
One quick question, please. And I heard what you said, and I just want to be sure I heard what you said was right. You do all recognize that we looked at the possibility of a GCIC as when, after Mr. Peacock had spoke. Y'all have your own, which y'all consider to be a whole different. We got 2 different models of a background check. And I understood. Did I understand you to say that y'all would be amicable to us sitting down to work out the language so that either one of those 2?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you are, then let me ask you this question: do you see a problem of submitting to the Department of Driver Services that electronically transferred with an affidavit from your company stating that y'all have this information and this is the information that Department of Public Safety, the Department of Driver Services is applicable? Would you have a problem? Do y'all have, as a company, a problem with that? To submit for that attachment to the driver's license so that that driver has an attachment?
Mm-hmm.
If that driver stopped, he can say, here's my attachment. I've made all the qualifications to be a driver.
Sure. I think that, Mr. Chairman, I think there might be creative ways that we could still accomplish the underlying idea of what you're trying to accomplish there. There should be a way where if somebody is pulled over and a police officer comes up to them, that they can verify that they are actually a rideshare driver. But from our perspective, we'd like to explore that kind of language with you. Potentially, it could be something based in the app that just shows quickly that this is who I am. This is all the details of the trip that I'm currently conducting. We're not so much supportive of the idea of an actual chauffeur's license endorsement, because that would then drive people to we fear that it would discourage people from signing up on the system, which would decrease the amount of rides that are available, which would raise prices and lower the reliability of the whole
Basically,
system.
it's not convenient for your drivers.
It's,
So we're all about convenience over public safety.
well, I disagree with that, but I think we could work with you on the things you mentioned to come up with some kind of process. Maybe it's like Representative Rutledge mentioned, where there's an auditing kind of function where the background checks where the state could verify background checks are actually being done without necessarily having us turn over information on who all the drivers are, because we treat that as very sensitive and proprietary commercial information that our competitors here would probably like to get access to, and vice versa for them. So I think there's an opportunity for us to continue to work through this, though.
We only have about 2 weeks or so before this legislative session is dead on this bill again.
Mm-hmm. Correct. We would very much like to have some kind of
possibility that we can get y'all to a table?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
we'd
very much like to have sensible regulations that describe this industry.
All right. Thank you very much, Dick. I appreciate you being here. John Keys, are you here? All right, John, who are you with?
The Georgia Motor Coach Operators Association, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Most of my members are motor coaches. You see them every day, large charter buses and so forth. But we do have several members who are limo operators and small bus operators. And nationwide, it's also, folks are taking a look at other Uber-type, Lyft-type operations that a lot of other states, in Massachusetts, I believe, there's a startup operation on freight that was mentioned just a little earlier, competition. What we are about is to try to make sure that everybody is on a level playing field. You all heard that a lot today. But make sure that every player in the game has liability insurance, is ensuring the safety of their passengers, has the ability to, and the ability of the state to monitor tax collection and remittance of taxes on a state and local level, and especially liability insurance. What you just heard from Uber was a recitation of their business model, but it's only fair to have this entire, I won't hate to use the word scheme, it was used a little earlier, but regulatory environment codified in law, so that anybody that wants to go into this business of providing app-driven transportation services knows the rules of the game and plays by the same rules that my folks do and a lot of other folks in this business do. So we support the bill and commend it to your favorable passage.
Thank you, my
Glad
friend.
to answer any questions.
We're about to lose all the committee members for other meetings, and everybody's having to leave here, and I apologize. We've run out of time here. Armand, are you with us? Yes, sir. You want to come over and share something with us, my friend? And I apologize. Everybody's got meetings they got a chair or be at here at 3 o'clock. So we will have to take this up again.
So I thank the committee for hearing us today. I myself, I am a rideshare driver. I drive for Lyft. Just wanted to come and share my side of the story. I'm a student at Georgia State. I'm a finance major. And for me, Lyft has definitely made me continue my college education possible. My mother, sorry, she's a single mother. She does her best to, raise me and my brother. My brother's currently studying in chemical engineering, and Lyft has made me financially independent in a sense that I can actually afford to go to school, pay for tuition, board, books, and all those kind of expenses that I couldn't have really done before. This is the ideal gig for me because it's super flexible in a sense that I can make my own schedule whenever I want to. I could dedicate myself to studying whenever I want to and to conduct my research and stuff. So for me, it's like the best ideal thing. When I signed up, it was pretty seamless. I just signed up through the app. I met with my mentor. We had an in-person vehicle inspection. And before I knew it, I was just on the road. I was providing safe, fast, and reliable rides to the other good people of Atlanta. I do believe that if there was a $300 fee imposed and with all these other loops that I would have to go through, that I would not be a Lyft driver today, and that I would not have, had all these like gains that I've had from them. I know that whenever I ride for a Lyft myself, I take it every day to school, I feel safe. I know what I'm getting into. Riders see the picture of the person's face. They see the car. They know exactly what they're getting into. For me, it's like it's very much like C to C, and I personally feel like the current regulations would tamper with what I already find so great and awesome for me.
Well, very good. Thank you for being here, and I commend you for working your way through Georgia State. I did the same thing many years ago.
Great.
And I'm glad you're able to find a way to get through there. I commend you for that and appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today. One question, when you signed up for Lyft, how long did it take you to get the background check or whatever you had to have to get them to approve you as a driver? Sir?
Right. So I signed up over a year ago now. Just now a year ago. So I actually don't remember the exact time. I think the background check process did take a couple of days, if not more,
to
a week.
2 or 3 days. All right. Thank you for being here, sir, and sharing that with us. Joseph Okpa.
It's Joseph Okpaku.
Okpaku, sorry.
No problem. I'm quite used to that.
I know we're running out of time here, so I will try to keep my comments brief. My name is Joseph Opaku, and I'm the Director of Public Policy for Lyft. So, Mr. Chairman and the remaining members of the committee, I do appreciate your time and attention on this. I had pages of stuff I was going to discuss, so I'm really going to make just two fundamental points. One is what Lyft is really about and what Lyft is really trying to accomplish, and then how Lyft is going about that and how that relates to the legislation that we're currently taking under consideration right now. The entire vision of Lyft is literally that everybody in this room be a Lyft driver or a Lyft passenger. The whole idea is to try to revolutionize the idea of ride sharing by making it something that's mainstream, safe, and easy. The only way that we're able to do this is through the use of casual part-time drivers. And our numbers show that about 70% of our drivers drive around 10 hours or 15 hours a week or less. And a separate study done by the California Public Utilities Commission that was conducted within the last month or so actually shows that the numbers may be even lower, that the average driver drives 20 hours a month or less. The reason I'm bringing this up is because, and I believe it was Representative Taylor who asked a question about, I guess, what our concern about some of these issues, and specifically background checks. And if that wasn't your question, I apologize. I may have mistaken my notes. Our background check standards, as my counterpart at Nick Zabriskie mentioned at Uber, are so stringent that around 10% of the people who apply to become Lyft drivers actually get to become Lyft drivers. And I would be remiss if I didn't take the time to acknowledge a good number of them who took time out of their day today on very short notice to come here and show their interest in this because of what Lyft has meant to them. And the reason I mentioned that is because given the fact that we're using part-time drivers, the success of this entire model depends on a driver being available. And if we're talking about drivers who are not on the roads 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, we need to make the process to become a driver as seamless as possible, as frictionless as possible, given the fact that our standards are so high. And so that brings us to what we're talking about here today. No one here is trying to say that a fingerprint background check is without value, but as Mr. Peacock mentioned, I do think that there are some aspects of the fingerprint-based background check that have been grossly overstated and that we still accomplish in other ways. Our background check is done by a company called Sterling Backchecks. Just so you know, they are used by numerous Fortune 100 companies, and they're actually used to do municipal background checks in the cities of Denver, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Phoenix, and Milwaukee. Our checks cover the databases that Mr. Zabriskie covered. We do a multi-state database check. We do a sex offender database check. We also do a federal offender database check. And then for any place where an applicant appears to have resided in their lifetime, we will do a direct county by county search of that county. And as you've heard today, the reason that's so important is because that's usually where the lag or the transmission of information happens either with the GCIC or with the FBI fingerprint database, is from getting the records from the county to the aggregating database. So we'll cut out the middleman. We'll go straight to the source to see if someone has anything on their record that would preclude them from being a Lyft driver. So the reason why we are struggling with this bill, and again, we are glad to hear that some members may be open to discussing other ways to amend this, is because the more barriers to entry that you put up on the front end, the more the casual driver is unlikely to join up and be a part of the platform. As Armand just mentioned, right now as a driver, all you need to do is apply through the app or apply online. You don't have to miss work. You don't have to miss school. Lyft, the company, takes on all the cost and the burden and the expense of doing the background check. And we do believe, and I don't want to rehash the testimony, that the background check that we do is not only on par with what's required of other existing industries, but actually goes above and beyond that, given the fact that we go nationwide and that we include the federal database as well. The one other thing I will add, and I know I'm running out of time, is that I feel that the safety debate has been kind of boiled down to one issue, and it's frankly very frustrating for me because I feel that Lyft has actually set a new bar in safety, and that is a bar that other industries should be trying to achieve. The reasons have been already discussed today. The fact that when you're getting a Lyft ride, you know who's going to pick you up. You have the picture of the driver. The transparency that we provide is unparalleled in the field of transportation. And that adds a significant layer of safety to what we're doing. The idea of a stranger picking you up is really not the case with a Lyft because you have a picture, and at the end of the ride, you have an email with the identity of who gave you a ride, where they picked you up, where they dropped you off, and how much they charged you. In addition to that, we have 24/7 on support staff that is ready to respond if anything happens that causes a passenger to make a comment in their app that might suggest that there's a problem with this Lyft driver. All it takes to take a Lyft driver off the platform is literally a push of a button back at headquarters, and they cannot receive any other rides on the platform until we've completed an investigation. These are just some of the measures that I strongly believe makes Lyft far and above what other industries currently do in the area of safety. And frankly, I think that if safety is a really real concern, then we should look at this more broadly and ask ourselves whether we should be asking other industries to live up to the standards that Lyft and other technologies like Lyft have been setting lately. With that, I do want to say that we are open to trying to make this work. We have seen legislation work in many other jurisdictions, Colorado, California, and most recently Illinois. Just this week in Virginia, a new bill passed that does not require fingerprint background checks. In fact, none of the state bills that I've just mentioned require fingerprint background checks. None of them require a per vehicle registration fee. None of them require any sort of for hire or chauffeur's vehicle endorsement. I know this is innovative and I know this is new, but other states are starting to wrap their heads around how this system works and how to balance innovation with still providing a very significant level of public safety. And I'm hoping that this committee can find a way to do that as well. And I am fully committed to assisting this committee in any way that I can to making that happen.
Thank you, Mr. Okpa, is that right?
Okpaku. Just
Okpaku.
pretend the
Sorry.
first K. Pretend the first K isn't even there.
Okay, Okpaka. Okay, I was trying to put that K in there all the
Yeah,
time.
no, it
Sorry,
messes
man.
everybody
up. Thank you for your presentation here. I appreciate that. And real quickly, I'm going to ask maybe a group of folks to try to sit down with, if you could be here. And I believe Nick, you said you'd be willing to work with us on some things. I'm going to ask Representative Tom Taylor, Representative Rutledge, Representative Hawkins, Chairman Powell, and myself to maybe get with you guys and see if we can't flesh and get this thing worked out to a way that's going to be satisfactory to everybody. If y'all could here in the next day or so, maybe get with us. We'll try to. If you could give me some contact information before you leave, so we could get in touch with you on that. I just got a burning question. Taxes. How you guys been paying taxes? Have y'all paid any taxes on your rides yet in the state of Georgia?
That's my understanding. The answer is no, and our situation is a little bit unique. I know that Nick mentioned the fact that they have an actual office of operations here in Georgia. We have no ties in Georgia. We don't have any office location. We don't have any employees. We don't own any vehicles, and we don't employ any drivers. That being said, I've made it clear both to you, I believe, in the recent phone call that we've had, and to Chairman Powell on many occasions, that we are not looking for a free ride. We're looking for some sort of a framework that makes sense for ride sharing. In other jurisdictions, we've agreed to six-figure annual fees in order for operations, so Lyft is not trying to skirt this issue. But we do believe that we occupy a space that is not as clearly delineated under the law as some might believe it is, given the newness of this type of operation and our relationship to the state of Georgia.
Hey, I looked at what Virginia did, and that doesn't really make me feel warm and fuzzy, to be honest with you. Okay. Dale, you got okay. All right. Thank you very much, sir. We look forward to getting your information, getting your contact information, and working with you. I got two more real quickly. Jeff Green, are you here? Yes, I'm here. Okay, sir. Would you like to come around and share with us real quickly with the remaining few of us that are here before we have to go to other meetings?
Chairman, distinguished members, I appreciate it very much. My name is Jeff Green. I'm the founder and president of Green Worldwide Transportation. This is our 27th year in business. I'm also the vice president of the Greater Atlanta Limousine Association, past president and director for the National Limousine Association. I've sat here and I've listened to a lot of it. I'm really going to try and consolidate a lot. Technology companies, as they claim, to me a technology company is simply Microsoft, Dell, some of these others. A transportation company is a company that provides and collects for transportation, which is clear what both Uber and Lyft do. As a result, they are subject, as you heard earlier, to the sales tax. And I can tell you, over the many years, I've paid over $1 million in sales tax and have done it every year. When I started my business, I made the conscious decision to determine what do I have to do to become legal in the state of Georgia, and I did it, and it is costly. And currently, background checks are very, very important. Every one of our drivers has them. Matter of fact, in the limousine industry, there's two of them, one by the Department of Public Safety and then by Homeland Security at the airport. And I can tell you from being a previous Atlanta police officer 14 years that there were many times when I made an arrest. Proper ID, including state ID, was presented to me. Made the arrest, took him down to jail, and on many, many occasions I would get a call from the jail saying, his name isn't Joe Johnson. His fingerprints came back, and this is who he really is. And it happens all the time. Using these other companies to do background checks, it's okay for Fortune 500 companies. It's okay for freight companies. But when you are dealing with children and your wives, it's important to know who is driving them. I can assure you that Bob Simon's wife, family, friends, colleagues would have loved to have known that his driver had over 9 convictions of driving issues and violations of the law. That's important. That's the reason that these background checks are so very important. And I can tell you also from being a past law enforcement officer that the only way to properly identify someone is through the fingerprints, because falsification runs errant throughout the world, throughout the U.S., and that's what we're trying to prevent. All the limousine and the taxi industries want is parity. Sales tax, well, quite honestly, I'm appalled when I hear, no, we don't pay sales tax, yet they're collecting the fees. And out of the $1 million I've paid, I'd like to enter in discussions with the Department of Revenue, not pay my sales tax and just talk about it. That's a lot of savings to me. I choose not to do it because that's not the proper way. And we're not asking, oh, they've got to go away. We just want to be on the same playing field. What they don't talk about are the number of the taxi cab drivers, the number of limousine drivers that are out of work, and companies that are closing up because we spend a lot of money making sure that our vehicles are safe, that our drivers are vetted, proper background checks, that we pay sales tax. We pay all the taxes that are required, and we don't question it. We don't look for ways around it. The last thing that I really want to say is that the state of Georgia, the legislative body, is in the business of public safety. That is the key, most important issue that is before us. And the only way to assure that, as I'm sure you will hear from the GBI, the Department of Public Safety, is to follow the regulations that are out there. Now, they can claim, like I said, they're a technology company. Microsoft's a technology company. However, when you transport and you collect, it is a vehicle for hire. And under Georgia law, there's only 2 ways. Either you're a limousine company or you're a taxi service. And the definition in taxi is by using a metered device that charges by mileage, which is exactly what Uber and Lyft are doing. So the laws are already on the book, and I think they have to declare which they are. Sales tax, if they don't have to pay it, we shouldn't have to pay it. It's got to be fair. There's a lot of drivers out there that are losing their jobs because they chose to go with companies that care about public safety and care about doing the right thing. And I wish I had more time, and I know you're out of time, so I'll make this short. But thank you very much for your time, and please, in considerations, I'd love to be part of this. I've been in this business 27 years, and on a national level, I also understand what's going on, not just on a national, but on a worldwide basis as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here and sharing that with us. Les?
share taxes. And the games can begin on the issue that Representative Bill spoke about with parity. Parity just simply means basic fairness. That's, I think, what we're talking about. But there's been so many words, and I've listened to so many conversations about this, that I can simply tell you that if there's not an obligation that you all think we're going to leave it all to the companies to do, then let's just tell everybody it's the Wild Wild West, and we'll just go out and let everybody do what they want to do. And if that satisfies the then I think, that's where we go. But I appreciate your time and consideration.
Obviously, we're not through with this issue. This is the, trying to remember what Churchill said, this is not the beginning of the end, but maybe this is the end of the beginning. So we will be taking this up again. But thank y'all for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you, what you've said, and for you that have stayed with us. And you guys that are going to help me out, I need to get y'all's contact information. Thank you very much.